The night before my medical school interview, my younger sister poured bleach over my only interview suit. She didn't spill it. She didn't drop the bottle. She stood 3 feet away from me, held the gallon container with both hands, and slowly poured it down the front of my navy blue suit. I watched the dark fabric turn orange, then yellow, then completely ruined. And the worst part? She was smiling. I stared at her. "Madeline, what are you doing?" She lowered the empty bottle. "Relax, Claire. It's just a suit." From the living room, my mother didn't even look up from her tablet. "Claire, please don't start." I turned toward her. "She just destroyed the only suit I have for my medical school interview tomorrow." My mother finally glanced at me. Her expression wasn't shocked. It was annoyed. "Then wear something else." "I don't have anything else." "That's not my problem." My father was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine in his hand. He looked at the ruined suit, then at Madeline, then at me. "Your sister is under a lot of pressure right now," he said. "Don't make this about you." I stood there with bleach dripping onto the floor. My sister had just destroyed the one thing I needed for the most important interview of my life, and somehow, I was the problem. I wish I could tell you that I screamed, that I threw the bottle against the wall, that I finally said everything I had been holding inside for 22 years. But I didn't. I simply unplugged the iron, picked up the ruined suit, and walked upstairs. Because by then, I had already learned something about my family. Whenever Madeline hurt me, I was expected to apologize for bleeding. My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 27 years old, and for most of my life, I was the daughter my family quietly decided would never be the important one. Madeline was born when I was 4. I remember standing at the bottom of our staircase in a pink dress while my parents carried her into the house. My mother didn't look at me. She looked at the baby. "Look at her face," she whispered. "She's perfect." I remember waiting for someone to say something about me. No one did. As I got older, I began noticing the difference. Madeline was sensitive. I was difficult. Madeline was charming. I was too serious. Madeline was ambitious. I was intense. When I won a statewide science competition at 17, my father barely looked at the trophy. "That's nice," he said. 10 minutes later, Madeline walked into the room wearing a new dress. My mother immediately stood up. "Turn around. Let me see how it fits." My trophy stayed on the table. Forgotten. That was the year I told my parents I wanted to become a doctor. My father stopped eating. My mother gave me a smile that felt more like pity. "Medicine is a very demanding career, Claire." "I know. You've always been more comfortable behind the scenes." I stared at her. "What does that mean?" She hesitated. Then she said the sentence I would remember for the rest of my life. "Madeline has a better bedside manner." Madeline was 14. She had never worked in a hospital. She had never cared for a patient. But my mother had already decided that my sister belonged in medicine. I was supposed to understand. So I stopped asking for permission. I went to college. I worked 2 jobs. I paid for most of my education myself. And after graduation, I began working as a patient advocate at a children's hospital in Boston. That's where I met Emma Reyes. Emma was 8 years old when she was diagnosed with leukemia. Her mother, Rosa, was raising her alone. The first time I entered Emma's hospital room, Rosa was crying quietly beside the window. Emma was sitting on the bed with a stuffed rabbit in her lap. I asked her if she was scared. She shook her head. Then she whispered, "If I say I'm scared, will they make me stay here longer?" I sat beside her. "No." She looked at me suspiciously. "How do you know?" "Because I'm going to stay here with you." "For how long?" I smiled. "As long as I can." That became our routine. I helped Rosa understand the doctors. I translated when the medical explanations became too complicated. I helped Emma with her homework. And every Friday, I brought her a new book. Emma started keeping a small notebook. She called it her proof book. Every night, she wrote down one thing that proved the world wasn't completely terrible. A warm blanket, a funny nurse, a strawberry milkshake, a good song. Then one morning, after a particularly difficult treatment, Emma looked through the hospital window. The sky was turning pink. She whispered, "The sun came back." I looked at her. "What?" She smiled. "It came back after yesterday." I wrote those words down later. I didn't know that sentence would one day be stolen. I didn't know my mother would read the story I wrote about Emma, And I certainly didn't know that my sister would eventually use a dying child's life to build a future that was never hers. Because the night before my interview, when Madeline poured bleach over my suit, she wasn't just trying to ruin my clothes. She was terrified. She knew something I didn't. The next morning, I would walk into a medical school interview wearing the very suit she had destroyed. And the dean waiting behind that door had already been holding a letter for 14 months. A letter written by Emma's mother, but containing Emma's final request. And when the dean finally read it to me, I realized my family had made one terrible mistake. They had spent years trying to erase my story, but they had forgotten that some stories leave evidence behind. I didn't know what was inside that letter. I only knew that 14 months earlier, a little girl named Emma Rise had written something that would eventually reach the admissions dean of the medical school I was about to interview at. And I had no idea how. At that point, I still believed my family was the biggest problem in my life. I was wrong. The real problem was that someone had taken the most painful experience of my life and turned it into a ladder my sister was using to climb into a future she had never earned. But before I tell you how I discovered that, you need to understand what happened to Emma. Because Emma wasn't just a patient I once helped. She changed the way I understood medicine, and she changed the way I understood my own family. After the morning she told me the sun had come back, Emma's condition began getting worse. There were good days. Days when she wanted pancakes. Days when she argued with her mother about doing homework. Days when she laughed so loudly that nurses would peek through the doorway to see what was happening. Then there were the other days. Days when she couldn't keep food down. Days when she was too tired to sit up. Days when Rosa would stand in the hallway with her hands pressed against her mouth because she didn't want Emma to see her cry. I stayed as much as I could. My official job was to help families navigate the hospital system, but Emma didn't care about my job description. She cared that I came back. One afternoon, she asked me, "Claire, do you think doctors get scared?" I said, "Of course they do." She frowned, "But they're not supposed to. Being scared doesn't mean you can't help someone." She thought about that. Then she said, "Maybe that's what makes them good doctors." I never forgot that. By the end of the year, Emma had started writing letters, not because she expected to die. At least, she never said that. She wrote letters because she wanted people to know what they meant to her. She wrote one to her favorite nurse, one to the doctor who had treated her, one to her mother, and one to me. I didn't know about the last one. Rosa kept it. Emma's health declined quickly. By the following autumn, the doctors had started talking to Rosa about comfort care. I remember sitting in the hospital room while Rosa listened. She nodded. She asked questions. She took notes. Then the doctor left. Rosa sat beside Emma's bed. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Emma looked at her mother. "Mommy?" Rosa wiped her eyes. "Yes, baby? Can you write something for me?" Rosa picked up a notebook. "What?" Emma looked toward me. Then she smiled. "Something for Claire." I froze. Rosa looked at me. Emma shook her head. "Not yet." So I left the room. I waited in the hallway. 20 minutes later, Rosa came out holding a folded piece of paper. Her eyes were red. I asked her what Emma had written. Rosa shook her head. "She wants me to give it to someone." "Who?" She smiled sadly. "I'll tell you later." I never got to ask again. Emma died 3 weeks later. I was there. Rosa was there. Her nurse was there. The doctor was there. My parents were not. My sister was not. After the funeral, I stopped talking about medical school. I had planned to apply that year, but I couldn't leave. Not while Emma was still sick. Not while Rosa was still trying to survive the hospital, the bills, the silence, and the empty bedroom waiting at home. So I stayed. I kept working, and I began writing. Not for an application. Not yet. I wrote because I needed somewhere to put everything I couldn't say. I wrote about Emma's proof book, about the sunrise, about the way she had asked me if frightened doctors could still help people. I wrote about Rosa. I wrote about the day Emma had reached for my hand during her first treatment. And I wrote one sentence that I never showed anyone. Medicine is not about being fearless. It is about staying when fear gives you every reason to leave. I saved the document on an old family cloud account. My mother had created it years earlier, Everyone in the family had access, but I never imagined anyone was reading my private drafts. I was wrong. The first warning came from my sister. A few weeks after Emma died, Madeline called me. "Claire, can I ask you something?" "What? What do medical schools like in personal statements?" I laughed. "Why are you asking me? I'm just curious. You've already been accepted." There was a pause. Then she said, "I want to know what made your application strong." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "Nothing." She changed the subject. I forgot about the conversation until months later. I was sitting in my apartment when I received an email from the family cloud account. It was an automatic security notification. Someone had accessed one of my documents. The document was my personal statement draft. I opened the access history. The account name was my mother's. The time was 2:47 a.m. I stared at the screen. Maybe it was accidental. Maybe she had clicked the wrong file. I told myself that. Then I saw the date. The document had been opened 2 days after I had discussed my future application with my father. I didn't think much of it. I should have. Because 6 weeks later, Madeline submitted her application to the medical school I had always dreamed of attending. And 3 months after that, she was accepted. My mother threw a dinner party. There were flowers on the table, champagne, people I had never met. My mother stood beside Madeline and smiled. "I'm so proud of my daughter." I was sitting across from them. I watched my sister accept congratulations. Someone asked her why she wanted to become a doctor. Madeline smiled. Then she told them about a little girl with leukemia. She told them about a mother who couldn't understand the doctors. She told them about a child who watched the sunrise through a hospital window. I stopped breathing. The room seemed to become very quiet. Because she was telling my story, not a similar story. Mine. She even used the sentence about the sun, the sentence I had written, the sentence I had never told her. I looked at my mother. She didn't look surprised. She looked proud. That was when I finally understood. My mother had read my essay, and she had given it to Madeline. I waited until the guests left. Then I asked my mother, "How much of my essay did you give her?" She stared at me. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Emma?" The color drained from her face. I said nothing else. I didn't have to. She knew exactly who I meant. And that was the moment I realized something terrifying. My sister hadn't simply stolen my words. She had built an entire medical school application around a child she had never met. And my mother had helped her do it, but there was still one thing I didn't know. Emma had left something behind. A letter. A letter that had traveled from a hospital room to the desk of the medical school dean, and the person who had delivered it had been waiting 14 months for me to apply. I just didn't know that yet. At the time, all I knew was that my sister had my future, and I had no idea how to take it back. For the first time in my life, I understood exactly what my mother had done. She had taken my words, my memories, my work, and given them to my sister. But the worst part wasn't that Madeline had used my story. The worst part was that she had never even met Emma. She had never sat beside her hospital bed, never held her hand, never translated a medical explanation for Rosa, never stayed through the nights when Emma couldn't sleep. Yet she stood in front of my family and described those moments as if they belonged to her. I wanted to confront her. I wanted to walk into her room and demand the truth. But I knew my family. If I accused Madeline, my mother would defend her. My father would tell me to calm down. And somehow, by the end of the conversation, I would become the problem. So I did something different. I said nothing. I waited. Because I had learned something while working in a hospital. The truth leaves records. People forget conversations. They change stories. They deny what they said. But records are patient. They wait. I started with my own records. My supervisor, Diane Mercer, had worked in pediatric oncology for more than 20 years. She knew exactly how many hours I had spent with Emma. She knew about the late-night family meetings, the translation sessions, the days I had stayed after my shift ended because Rosa was too frightened to go home alone. When I told Diane what had happened, she didn't speak for several seconds. Then she asked, "Are you sure your sister used your work?" I showed her the essay. Diane read it. Her expression changed. "Claire," she said quietly, "this isn't a story someone could invent from a hospital tour." I nodded. "She never met Emma." Diane looked back at the screen. Then we need to document everything. She helped me request my official patient advocacy records. The file was enormous. Years of notes, appointment coordination, family conferences, translation requests, follow-up calls. And Emma's name appeared again and again. My name was beside it. There were hundreds of entries. The records showed exactly how long I had worked with Emma and Rosa. They showed that I had been present during treatment, during the difficult conversations, during the final weeks. Then Diane helped me request visitor records. I knew what I would find, but seeing it in writing still made my stomach twist. Madeline had claimed she had extensive experience at the hospital. Her application suggested that she had spent significant time working with pediatric patients. The records showed 4 visits. 4. The total time was less than 6 hours. And she had never entered Emma's room. Not once. I stared at the report. 4 visits. 5 hours and 41 minutes. That was the entire relationship my sister had with the hospital. Emma had spent months there. I had spent years. Madeline had spent an afternoon. Yet somehow her application had been built around the life Emma and I had shared. I took photographs of every page. I saved copies in 3 different places. Then I went back to the cloud account. I opened my original essay. The document history showed that I had written it months before Madeline submitted her application. Every draft was there. The first version, the second version, the rewritten paragraphs, the deleted sentences, the timestamps, my name, my mother's access. And then I found something else. The document had been opened by my mother at 2:47 in the morning. 2 days later, my sister had asked me what medical schools wanted in a personal statement. I sat back in my chair. I didn't need a confession anymore. I had a timeline, but I still didn't know how much my mother had given her. So I called my father. He didn't answer. I called again. This time, he picked up. Claire? Did Mom give Madeline my essay? There was silence. Not surprise. Silence. That was enough. Dad? He exhaled. I don't know what you're talking about. You do. Claire? Did she give her my essay? Another pause. Then he said, you need to be careful. I closed my eyes. That isn't an answer. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it. He didn't. He simply said, come home. I almost laughed. For 27 years, my family had told me not to make things worse. Now they wanted me to come home. I said no. My father hung up. 3 days later, Madeline called me. Her voice sounded nervous. Claire, can we talk? About what? About the application. I said nothing. She continued. I know you're upset. Why would I be upset? Because you think I copied you. I leaned back in my chair. Did you? She was silent. Then she said, I used some ideas. I stared at the wall. Some ideas? Claire, you weren't even applying that year. That doesn't make my work yours. You were going to apply eventually. That still doesn't make it yours. Her voice became sharper. You don't understand how hard this was for me. I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. How hard what was. Getting accepted. I laughed once. Not because anything was funny, because I didn't know what else to do. You used a dying child's story to get into medical school. I didn't say that. You never met Emma. I knew about her. That's not the same thing. Mom told me about her. I froze. There it was. My mother had told her. Maybe she had given her the essay. Maybe she had explained the details. Maybe she had helped her construct the entire story. But Madeline still knew. She knew the story wasn't hers, and she used it anyway. I asked her, did you write about Emma in your application? She didn't answer. That was the second confession. After we hung up, I opened my original essay again. I reread the section about the sunrise. Then I opened Madeline's application essay. I had obtained a copy through a former classmate who had seen it during the application process. The sentence was there. Almost exactly. The sun came back the next morning, even after the worst day. My sentence, my memory, my life. I printed both documents, then I placed them side by side. I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't angry anymore. I was calm. And that frightened me, because I knew what came next. I would have to apply to the same medical school as my sister. I would have to walk into the interview room. I would have to tell the truth. And if the school discovered what Madeline had done, her entire future could collapse. I knew that. But I also knew something else. I had not created that danger. She had. My mother had. They had simply assumed I would remain quiet. The next morning, I opened my medical school application. I rewrote my personal statement from the beginning. I did not copy my old essay. I didn't need to. Emma's story belonged to me because I had lived it. I wrote about the things Madeline could never know. The sound of Rosa's voice when she was afraid. The way Emma counted the ceiling tiles during painful procedures. The small notebook she called her proof book. The final conversation we had about fear. I wrote the truth. Then I submitted my application. 3 months later, the interview invitation arrived. I stared at the email for almost 5 minutes. The school was the same one where Madeline was already studying. I almost declined. Then I thought about Emma. I thought about Rosa. I thought about the years I had spent being told that my dreams were too large. And I accepted. The interview was scheduled for February. The night before, Madeline destroyed my suit. At the time, I thought she was trying to make me miss the interview. I thought she was simply jealous. I didn't know she had already received a message from the admissions office. I didn't know the dean had noticed the similarities between our essays. I didn't know he had already contacted Emma's physician. And I didn't know that a letter written by a 9-year-old girl had been sitting in his desk for 14 months. The next morning, I drove to the interview wearing the ruined suit. I expected embarrassment. I expected judgment. I expected the admissions committee to notice the bleach stain. What I didn't expect was for the dean to look at it, then look at my name, and suddenly realize exactly who I was. He had been waiting for me, and when I finally sat across from him, he opened a drawer and pulled out the letter Emma had written. Then he said, "Claire, I need to ask you something." He placed the letter on the desk. "Are you the woman Emma Reyes was writing about?" I looked at the folded paper. I recognized the handwriting on the outside. It was Rosa's. My hands began to shake. The dean unfolded it, and then he read the words that would finally give Emma a voice in the one place my family had tried to take from me. The dean unfolded the letter. For a moment, he didn't read it. He simply looked at me. Then he looked down at the handwriting. "Claire," he said quietly, "before I read this, I need to ask you something." I couldn't speak. "Did you know that Emma's mother sent a letter to this school?" I shook my head. "No," he nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." Then he began to read. "Please choose Claire." My breath caught. The dean continued. "She stayed with me when I was scared." I closed my eyes. I could hear Emma's voice. Not the hospital machines. Not the doctors. Her voice. She helped my mommy understand when the words were too difficult. The room became blurry. She reads to me when I can't sleep. The dean paused. Then he read the final line. "She is already a doctor in the ways that matter." He placed the letter on the desk. I couldn't look at him. I was looking at Emma, at the little girl who had once asked me if scared doctors could still help people. The dean gave me a moment. Then he said, "This letter was sent to me 14 months ago." I looked up. Why? Because Emma's physician had trained with me years ago. When he received the letter, he recognized your name. My name? Your name was written on the outside. I stared at the letter. How did he know I would apply here? He didn't. The dean leaned back. He simply asked me to keep it. For how long? Until you arrived. I didn't know what to say. Then he opened a second file. This one was on his laptop. "There's another matter." My stomach tightened. "Your sister's application." I went completely still. He turned the screen slightly toward himself. "We noticed similarities between your application and your sister's." I said nothing. At first, we thought it was coincidence. Siblings can share experiences. He clicked on another document. "But some details are highly specific." He looked at me. "The sentence about the sunrise." I swallowed. "She copied it." "We are investigating that." He opened another page. "Your sister also described extensive clinical experience with a pediatric oncology patient." I stared at him. "She never met Emma." The dean's expression changed. "Are you certain?" "Yes." "How certain?" "I was there." I told him everything. The hospital, the records, the 4 visits, the 5 hours. The fact that Madeline had never entered Emma's room. The dean listened without interrupting. When I finished, he folded his hands. "Claire, I want you to understand something." I waited. "If the information you've provided is accurate, this is not a disagreement between sisters." I looked at him. "It is an academic integrity matter." Those words followed me out of the building. I sat in my car for almost an hour. I had driven there expecting an interview. I left knowing that my sister's entire future was under investigation. I called Diane first. She answered immediately. "How did it go?" I told her about the letter. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she said, "Emma got you there." I looked through the windshield. "Yes?" "Then make sure you don't let anyone take you away from the truth now." That evening, I called my mother. She answered on the first ring. "Claire, sweetheart, how did the interview go?" I didn't answer. Instead, I asked, "Did Madeline write about Emma?" Silence. 4 seconds. That's a long time when someone is pretending not to know what you're talking about. I didn't say Emma's name before asking. My mother didn't ask who I meant. She simply said, "You're tired." I closed my eyes. "Did you give Madeline my essay?" "Claire, did you? Come home." "No. We need to discuss this as a family." "No. You are making a terrible mistake." I almost laughed. "Am I?" My mother lowered her voice. "Madeline is already in medical school." "I know. Do you understand what you're threatening?" "Yes. Her future." I looked down at the folder beside me. "No, Mom." My voice was calm. "She is responsible for her future." My mother hung up. The next day, I received an email from the dean. He asked me to provide a written statement. I spent 6 hours writing it. Not because I didn't know what happened, because I wanted every word to be exact. I included my work with Emma, the dates, the hospital records, the personal statement, the cloud access history. I included everything I could prove. Then I sent it. The investigation began. Within 2 weeks, the school had compared our essays. The result was devastating. Multiple passages were similar. Some were almost identical. But one sentence was word for word, the sentence about the sunrise. The sentence Emma had spoken, the sentence I had written, the sentence Madeline had submitted as her own. The committee requested my hospital records. They requested Madeline's visitor history. The difference was impossible to ignore. My records contained years of documented work. Madeline's records contained 4 visits, 5 hours and 41 minutes. She had never met Emma. The school also requested access records from the family cloud account. That was when my mother stopped pretending. She called me. "Claire, you have to stop this." "I didn't start it." "Your sister made a mistake." "She used my work. She was under pressure." "So was I." "You're going to destroy her." I was silent. My mother began crying. "She's your sister." I looked at the framed photograph on my desk. It was a picture of Emma. She was smiling. Her hospital gown was too large. Her hair was gone. But she was smiling. I said, "Emma was someone's daughter too." My mother went quiet. Then she whispered, "Don't compare them." I closed my eyes. "That's exactly what you did." She hung up. 3 days later, my father called me. He asked me to meet him. We met at a small cafe. He looked older than I remembered. He placed his phone on the table. "I have something you need to see." He opened a message thread between him and my mother. The first message was from the night my mother accessed my essay. I read it. "Claire's writing about Emma is much stronger than anything Madeline has." The next message was from my father. "That's Claire's work." My mother replied, "Claire isn't applying this year." Then, "Madeline needs something strong." My hands began to shake. My father scrolled further. There were messages about which parts Madeline should use, which details sounded more emotional, which experiences would make her seem more compassionate. They had discussed my life like it was material, like Emma's suffering was a resource, like I was simply an inconvenient owner of a story they wanted to borrow. I looked at my father. "Why didn't you stop her?" He stared at the table. "I should have." "That's not what I asked." He swallowed. "Because I was afraid." "Of Mom?" He nodded. "Of losing the family." I looked at him. "You didn't lose the family." He finally looked up. "You lost me years ago." He flinched. I didn't say it to hurt him. I said it because it was true. Then he forwarded the messages to my phone. All of them. The evidence was now complete. The original essay, the timestamps, the hospital records, the visitor logs, the messages, the letter. Everything was coming together. But there was still one missing piece. Emma's final drawing. Rosa had told me she had given it to my mother. My mother had promised to deliver it. I had never received it. I asked my mother about it. She said, "I don't remember." I knew she was lying. I just didn't know where it was. Until the night I returned to my childhood home. My mother was in the dining room. My sister was sitting beside her. My father was staring at the floor. I walked past them. My mother stood up. "Claire, where are you going?" I didn't answer. I walked upstairs into the master bedroom. Then I opened the second drawer of my mother's dresser, the same drawer she had told me was private when I was 10 years old. Underneath a stack of silk scarves was a folded piece of hospital paper. I picked it up. My hands started shaking. I unfolded it. There was a drawing, a little girl sitting beside a woman. Their hands were touching. On the back were 5 words, "For when you become a doctor." And underneath them, Emma. I stood there in silence. My mother had kept it for 14 months. The child who drew it had died. The woman it was meant for had never seen it. And my mother had hidden it in the drawer she had once told me I was never allowed to open. I walked downstairs with the drawing in my hand. Everyone looked at me. My sister saw it first. Her face went white. My mother whispered, "Claire, please." I placed the drawing on the table. Then I placed my sister's essay beside it, my original draft beside that, and the hospital records. I looked at Madeline. "You never met her." My sister began crying. I looked at my mother. "You took her words." Then I picked up the drawing. "And you kept this from me." No one answered. For the first time in my entire life, my family had nothing left to say. But the hearing was still ahead. And at that hearing, my sister would have to face the people who knew the truth, including Emma's mother. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. I barely slept the night before. Not because I was afraid of Madeline. I had already spent years being afraid of my family. I was afraid of something else. I was afraid that after everything, people would still find a way to blame me for ruining the family, for exposing my sister, for refusing to stay quiet. At 7:30 that morning, I received a message from Rosa. It said, "Claire, I will speak for Emma." I stared at the screen. Then I wrote back, "You don't have to." Her reply came almost immediately. "Yes, I do." The hearing began at 9. Madeline sat across the table with a lawyer beside her. My parents were not allowed inside the room. My father had asked to attend. My mother had demanded to attend. The committee refused both requests. The room was quiet. A recording camera stood in the corner. The dean sat at the center of the table. He looked at Madeline, then at me. "This is an academic integrity hearing regarding allegations of misrepresentation and unauthorized use of another applicant's original work." Madeline looked down. I opened my evidence folder. I didn't begin with emotion. I began with facts. I placed my hospital records on the table. These are my documented patient advocacy records. Then I placed the visitor logs beside them. These are my sister's hospital records. The difference was obvious. My records contained years of work. Madeline's showed 4 visits, 5 hours and 41 minutes. The committee reviewed them carefully. One member asked, "Did your sister ever meet Emma Reyes?" "No." "Are you certain?" "Yes." "How?" "Because I was with Emma." The room went silent. Then I placed the 2 essays side by side, my original draft. Madeline's submitted application. I had highlighted the similarities. The sentence about the sunrise, the description of Rosa, the details of Emma's treatment, the phrase about fear. One of the committee members looked at Madeline. "Did you write this material yourself?" Madeline's lawyer stood. "We object to the characterization." The dean raised a hand. "This is not a criminal trial, counselor." Then he looked at Madeline. "Answer the question." Madeline's lips trembled. "I wrote the essay." I looked at her. "You wrote the words." She glanced at me. "I didn't know everything was yours." I almost laughed. "You knew Emma was my patient." She looked down. "I knew about her." "You never met her." "I knew the story." "That isn't the same thing." She said nothing. The committee then reviewed the cloud access history. My mother's account had opened my document. The date was clear. The time was clear. The document existed months before Madeline's application. Then they reviewed the messages between my parents. The messages were undeniable. My mother had written, "Claire isn't applying this year. Madeline needs something strong. She won't know." I watched the committee members read. No one spoke. My father had been right. Records were patient. They waited. Then Rosa joined the hearing by video. The screen turned on. She was sitting in her small apartment. Behind her was a framed drawing, Emma's drawing, the one I had found in my mother's dresser. The dean asked her to confirm her identity. Then he asked, "Did your daughter know Claire Whitmore?" Rosa looked at the camera. "Yes." "Did she know Madeline Whitmore?" Rosa's face changed. No. The word was simple, but it hit the room like something heavy. The dean asked, "Did Madeline ever visit Emma?" No. "Did she ever help with her treatment?" No. "Did she ever speak with you?" No. Rosa looked down for a moment. Then she said, "My daughter loved Claire." Her voice began to shake. "Claire stayed with her when she was afraid. She helped me understand the doctors. She read to my daughter. She was there." Rosa looked toward the camera. Madeline was not. No one moved. Rosa continued. "Emma wrote the letter because she wanted Claire to become a doctor. She believed Claire already was one in the ways that mattered." Then she paused. "And Claire never received the letter." I looked down. My hands were shaking. Rosa's voice became quieter. "I gave something else to Claire's mother." The dean asked, "What was it?" "A drawing." "Did she promise to deliver it?" "Yes." "Did she?" Rosa looked at me. "No." The room fell silent. The dean turned toward Madeline. "Did you know about the drawing?" Madeline shook her head. "No." "Did your mother ever tell you about it?" "No." The committee then asked Madeline if she wanted to make a statement. She began crying. I was under pressure. Nobody interrupted. I didn't think it would go this far. The dean looked at her. "You were accepted into medical school using experiences you did not have." Madeline wiped her face. "My mother gave me the material." The room became completely silent. She had finally said it. My mother had given her my work. But the dean continued. "You were not a child." Madeline looked down. "You were an adult applicant." She said nothing. "You had the opportunity to correct the record after entering medical school." Still nothing. "You did not." Madeline began crying harder. But I didn't feel victorious. Not yet. I felt tired. I looked at her and realized something. For years, I had wanted my sister to understand what she had done to me, but she didn't need to understand. The truth was enough. The committee ended the hearing. The decision would come later. I walked outside. My father was waiting in the hallway. My mother was there too. She stood the moment she saw me. "Claire." I kept walking. She grabbed my arm. "Please." I looked at her hand, then at her face. "Please what?" "Don't destroy her future." I pulled my arm away. "You gave her mine." My mother started crying. "I was trying to help her." "You were trying to make her look like me. You're sisters." "No." I shook my head. "We are daughters." I looked at her. "But you only ever wanted one of us to succeed." Then I walked away. 3 weeks later, I received an email. I read it twice, then a third time. The medical school had accepted me. I had been offered a place in the incoming class. I sat on the edge of my bed. For a long time, I couldn't move. Then I called Rosa. She answered. I said, "I got in." There was silence. Then she began crying. Emma knew. I closed my eyes. Yes. I accepted the offer the next morning. 2 weeks later, the committee issued its decision. Madeline was dismissed from the medical program. The decision cited academic misrepresentation and the use of material that did not reflect her own experiences. My mother blamed me. My father did not. A month later, my father moved out of the house. He told me he was separating from my mother. "I should have protected you," he said. I didn't tell him that I forgave him. I wasn't ready, but I agreed to see him again. That was enough. My mother sent me one final message. "You destroyed your sister." I read it. Then I put my phone down. I had not destroyed my sister. I had simply stopped protecting the lie. A few months later, I visited Rosa. She had framed Emma's drawing. It hung above the kitchen table. I brought the blue suit with me, the suit Madeline had ruined. Rosa turned it inside out. Then she took out a needle and white thread. "What are you doing?" I asked. She smiled. "Something Emma would like." She carefully stitched one letter into the inside lining. I looked at it. "Why?" Rosa touched the thread. "So they can ruin the outside." She looked at me. "But they can't take what is inside." I started crying. For the first time, I let myself. Rosa hugged me, and for a few minutes, neither of us said anything. I wore that suit on my first day of medical school. The bleach stain was still visible. I never repaired it. My mother had once told me it was only a suit. She was wrong. It was the suit I wore when my family tried to humiliate me. It was the suit I wore when the dean finally recognized the truth. It was the suit I wore when the story my family tried to steal became the evidence that exposed them. And inside the lining was a single letter. L. For Emma. For the little girl who spent her final months looking for proof that the world still contained something good. She found it. And somehow, years after she was gone, She became proof of it for me. I begin medical school this fall. My sister will not be there. My mother will not be there. My father might be, but it doesn't matter anymore. Because for the first time in my life, I am walking toward my future without waiting for my family to decide whether I deserve it. And every time I put on that blue suit, I remember the truth. They thought they were destroying my chance. They didn't know they were giving me the one thing they could never steal. The evidence. And the little girl my family tried to erase from my story, she became the reason the truth could never be erased.